Yeah, yard man. Yeah, yard man, don't. Respect. I'm on to a yard. I respect and love, man, to all Jamaica, no matter what in the world. One eye, like I own you. No matter where in this world I go, I am a Jamaican. No birthday pass I have to show, cause I am a Jamaican. No matter where in this world I go, I am a Jamaican. No birthday pass I have to show, cause I am a Jamaican. I have Jamaican walk, them here Jamaican talk, cause I am a Jamaican. Them here Jamaican chat, them say Jamaican bap, cause I am a Jamaican. Where in this world I go, I am a Jamaican. I am a Jamaican. I know I will have to show, cause I am a Jamaican. Them say, Lord, what a boy can run, that is a Jamaican.
All right.
When they see the Rasta man from Jamaica,
Getting set, what a Jamaican.
Market, woman in a donkey cat, rivers and streams, fountains and mountains. In a Jamaica we have it all. Now everywhere in the world I go, I am a Jamaican. No birthday as I have to show, cause I am a Jamaican. When you hear that music I play out the door, it must be Jamaican. When you smell the food I cook when the breeze blow, got to be Jamaican. Hey, beautiful smile, God-fearing people.
Yeah, we're getting set.
Going across the world, yet you're so simple. Yeah, and it's not your fault that you're so loving and kind.
Of course, we listen to the songs like Butcher Bantan, right?
No matter where I go, I am a Jamaican. No ID I man need to show, cause I am a Jamaican. Oh, them people, they laugh so much, got to be Jamaican. They have overcome struggles and been through so much, got to be Jamaican. You're not.
Wait a few more minutes, a few more people will join.
Resilient and brave, industrious, yes, we are Jamaican. No matter anywhere in this world I go, I am a Jamaican. No ID I man have to show, I am a Jamaican. Them say, Lord, what a boy can run, must be a Jamaican. When they make the reggae music from Jamaica, that should be Jamaican.
All right. I could tone it down. Greetings. Welcome to Watagwan. My name is Donovan Simon. I'm the president for the Jamaican Canadian Association, Alberta, based in Calgary. And Watagwan is our way of connecting to the community, talking about things that are happening in our association, in our city, in our country, in Jamaica, in the world. And of course, today we're going to talk about the Jamaican diaspora. Those of us who, in some cases, we chose to, in other cases, possibly not, to live overseas, outside of Jamaica. And we're going to talk about what our role is in the development of the rock. But of course, before we get into the discussion, we have to do some features of Watagwan. And the first one is the Patois phrase or the Patois word of the day. Today is a phrase, right? And if you're familiar with the Jamaican Patois, help those who don't understand it by putting your interpretation of what I'm going to use today in the comment section. So if you're in Jamaica, there's the likelihood that somebody might call you something like a dryland tourist. Dry land tourist is a patois phrase of the day. And if you were in Jamaica and we were going to use this in a sentence, using the term I think I used 2 weeks ago, we'd say something like, I should go on all the time, like dry land tourists. Right? The power of patois, right? So I should go on all the time, like dry land tourists. Right? Patois is an amazing thing. You know, when I was preparing for the show, I said to myself, only patois could have a language where there's a word called e, and you respond by saying e. Right? Anyway, won't get into that. The patois phrase of the day is dry land tourist. If you know what it means, put it in the comment section so that people can understand what that means. Of course, we have to share some of what is happening coming up in the community. So let's get to that. The 26th, so that's tomorrow, we're going to have our general meeting. The Jamaican Canadian Association hasn't met physically since March, right? So we're going to try and have a meeting, right? Because it's about time. It's going to be at the Winston Heights Community Center. It's going to start at 7 p.m. COVID-19 protocols are in effect. So wear your mask, we're going to have sanitization, we're going to have spacing. But more importantly, we want to get together because it's been a while since we have gotten out there and gotten a chance to see some of our friends and, you know, have a quick chat, but more importantly, do the business of the association. Our annual general meeting is also coming up on October 31st. It's also going to be at the Winston Heights Community Center. It's going to start at 7 p.m. You know, COVID-19 protocols in effect. We have election of officers, and it's important for us to get out there. We will have some virtual options for both these meetings, but like I said, we're going to get back out and we're going to physically meet for both our general meeting on the 26th and also our annual general meeting on the 31st. We also want to share that the Wozo Africa Cultural Festival is going on virtually. The last episode is tomorrow, the 26th. I think it starts at 11 a.m. To register to attend, just go to wozoafrica.com, wozoafrica.com, and you can get on. There's also another event tomorrow, right? The Rise Up Reggae Fest. You know, Powerhouse and the Steadies are going to be on stage. You can get tickets at showpass.com, Rise Up Reggae Fest, right? So go out and support these things, right? Jump online where you can, support the Wozo Festival, support, you know, Rise Up with Powerhouse Band and the Steadies. And like I said, the general meeting is tomorrow at 7 p.m. at the Winston Heights Community Center. And on October 31st, we have our general meeting, our annual general meeting, right? Also at the Winston Heights Community Center. All right, like I said, patois word of the day, our phrase of the day is dryland tourist. You know, I had a couple of guests line up, but all of them not showing just yet, but we're going to get started because we're going to talk about the Jamaican diaspora and how we contribute to the rock. And I'm going to bring my guest on, you know, friend of mine, NGD, Neil Gordon DeCiccio out of Toronto. NGD, I have to unmute first, you know. I have to unmute first.
Faulty start, but that's not how we're gonna finish. Hello.
No, man. Wow. Yes, I'm a friend.
Me good, man. How
You're
you
good. Yeah, man. I tell you. So for, you know, just a little bit of introduction, and you know, we expect a couple more people to join. If they join, great. If they don't, we're going to run with NGD. Neil is born in Toronto of Jamaican parents and heritage out of St. Elizabeth, Jamaica, right? A lawyer who is called to the bar in both Ontario and Jamaica. Served as an intern in the Grace Kennedy Birthright Program back in 2008. But most importantly, at least for me anyway, in 2017, noted as top 40 under 40 lawyer in Canada.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's
man.
Right.
All right, big up. All right, we're going to talk. But Neil is also an elected member of the Global Jamaica Diaspora Council. I think this council was set up in 2019 by the government of Jamaica, right? Mm-hmm. And we're going to get into talking about that a little bit more, right? But first, Neil, maybe let's talk about your perspective on the role you think us, as you know, I am part of it too, in the diaspora should be playing and contributing to Jamaica and its development?
Well, I think the first thing is, being a positive representation of who we are. We are not only representatives here in Canada of our Jamaican heritage, but we may very well be one of the only individuals that people that we're coming into contact may have with our culture. So I think seeing ourselves as ambassadors of our culture and representing them positively is a part of the conversation. And whether it's just how you're generally engaging or taking on formal roles. Many of us may serve in organizations that involve cultural associations like the JCA associations that are throughout the provinces. So getting involved in having conversations and lending a voice so that hopefully issues that are impacting us here in Canada, and this is a part of what our role on the Global Jamaica Diaspora Council is about, has an impact, or at least is heard and factored in and considered when programming and policies are being made on home base that impacts not only maybe ourselves, but our families and our legacies.
Mm-hmm. So since you mentioned the Global Jamaica Diaspora Council, talk to us a little bit about what that council is. I know it's a lot of people, 28 people, half of them elected. What's the role of this particular council? And give us some background on it.
For sure. So this council is, as you had mentioned, a 28 nonpartisan group of volunteers. So what that means is that we don't necessarily represent any one particular political party. Instead, we in fact represent an advisory and consultative body that helps to create pathways to increase the engagement of the diaspora with the homeland. We are one of our goals is to reflect the inclusivity and help expand and collaborate. I think one of the things that our community tends to find itself doing is operating in a very silo or fragmented manner. And so what we're hoping to try and reinforce is not only the necessity or the need, especially in this time, to work together and create those critical partnerships, but also to reap the benefit, right? Try and maximize what can come from those synergies when we partner to develop, do nation building between both Jamaica and Canada here. And hopefully what our roles will serve as well on the council is to empower and encourage others. I think what we're noticing within the Jamaican diaspora particularly is you have individuals who may have been born in Jamaica and have come back home, and they're finding ways to still connect with their community and find a sense of belonging. And then you have individuals like myself who were born here in Canada and are welcoming and appreciative of our Jamaican heritage, but we're also trying to identify and determine how we connect and create pathways to connect back home as well. Mm-hmm. So I think not only are we here symbolically to say that we're creating a bridge between Jamaica and the diaspora, but even myself, there's a colleague of mine, there's two of us that represent Canada. And the beautiful thing is what we each bring is our perspectives because mm-hmm. of the frames of references and our connections and current relationships that we're fostering with our community and back home. So that gives some insight there.
So there are 28 members of this council, 14 are elected, 14 are nominated by, I think, the government. And you're one of the elected representatives, right, for Canada. There are two, Yvette and yourself, right?
That's correct. That's correct.
So,
go ahead.
So do you think that the Jamaicans were not outside of Jamaica and the government of Jamaica, for example, appreciate the role that the diaspora can play in the development of the country? And talk to me a little bit about their perception of those of us who choose to be are in the diaspora.
Okay, so that was a two-part question.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Obviously, it's a hot-seated question. So the first aspect, let's talk about the first aspect. Just reiterate that for me.
Yeah, the perspective of the Jamaican government and Jamaicans overall, and those of us in the diaspora? What do you think they think of us?
Um, I think that they see us as a valuable resource because we're able to help them to better understand what some of our needs may be when having to transact or facilitate and engage with back home. I think especially with the institution of the Global Jamaica Diaspora Council, that is a mechanism geared specifically towards helping to facilitate more effective engagement because they realized that there was a disparity between what was happening on the ground and maybe some of the narratives that were taking place in the diaspora. And as I had mentioned, creating that bridge, I think what they're looking to do is just try and tap into the capacities and the manpower and the intelligence and the relationship that we already have to back home, because really during the 50s and 60s a lot of people were leaving Jamaica to seek out opportunity, and now what you find is that there's a change in more of us and maybe the byproduct of those pioneers saying, well, how can we actually invest in back home? And I think what they're looking at us as is potentially opportunities for us to facilitate and reestablish what the connection looks like between the diaspora because of the level of interest that they're seeing with the engagement over the years.
Is the perception balanced though? Because there are some views that, you know, those who are outside of Jamaica are only seen as ATMs, right? Whether it's a remittance or whether it's some form of investment, it's always a flow of dollars as opposed to some of the other, you know, things that I think we can contribute. What's your thought?
Well, I do agree that there is a stigma that comes away, and it's really premised on the concepts, if I may, of like barrel babies, right? There was, before remittances became a thing, barrels were the thing, right? There has always been this perpetuation within our culture of giving back, and I think some of those origins find themselves premised in religious and faith-based principles, and then other aspects have been shaped by what has actually taken place with the chapters of our history. I don't think that there's an issue with giving back because that's the sort of thing that we do want to instill in each other as a value and a principle, and in terms of paving the way and moving forward. But I do think that we can participate in helping to change and shape that narrative, if I may, of ATMism. I think remittances, if I'm not mistaken, do make a big sector of the GDP and the economy in Jamaica. But then on that front as well, when you see it layered in a season like this that includes COVID and equalizing factors like unemployment and us really having to stop, the markets aren't performing the way that they used to. This conversation is timely, and I think what it's causing families to do is to have honest conversations about how we manage money. And if anything, it's created an opportunity for us to even focus on maybe financial literacy programs that focus on how we manage money, and how we can instill habits on budgeting and management and income generation, so that we're focusing more on teaching each other skills that in the long run will help us to manage what we have, because it's not the way it used to be, right?
But them still like, oh, you got Western Union, you know. Anyway, let me pause for a minute and you know, greet my friend Karen. Dr. Karen Dunkley is joining us out of Philly. Karen, how you doing?
Hi, Karen.
Doing well, Ina. How are you?
Yeah,
Good
man,
evening to you and to your listeners, and good evening to Naila.
yeah, greetings. And for those who wouldn't know, because Karen is a, you know, educator extraordinaire. But I might go through your bio. It's too long for read.
Yes, please do.
Right? but what I want to big up, because I know our people on the show, is alumni of St. Catherine High, same school, Prime Minister of the Jamaica, you know. I have to big up St. Catherine, you know.
Yes.
Right? And since I'm from Bagwaka, in some cities so close, you know, we're close enough there too.
Big up, that's right. Walk is right next door, yes.
Right, there you go. So we've gotten into the conversation And for the listeners, Dr. Karen Dunkley is also an elected member of the Global Jamaica Diaspora Council representing Northeast United States. Karen, we're talking about the perception of Jamaicans, of those of us in the diaspora. And I was saying sometimes there's this ATM mentality, right? Send some money come a Western Union or the governments of the diaspora must just invest dollars blindly. Well, what's your perspective?
I think I heard, certainly I came on, so thank you again for having me. And I heard Naila really articulating a position around remittance and what it means. So I think that certainly we're in the throes right now of a pivotal moment where Jamaica has to redefine the relationship with diaspora. And I think what we're seeing across diaspora, and diaspora, I always like to define it, just simply means if you live overseas, if you live outside of Jamaica, you're a member of diaspora. It's not an elite group. Diaspora is a movement. So any Jamaican, regardless of your occupation, you are a member of diaspora. And what has had to happen with remittances? So we know remittances are 16% of Jamaica's GDP, 9% really is left over for what we call public investments. The majority of remittances for consumption. It goes to families to pay bills. It goes to actually single mother households to really help them in terms of a supplement for income. And that relationship has to change. There's still a deep reliance on remittance, both public and private. We do know that, strangely enough, and I think it's the fortitude of the diaspora that remittances have not decreased. So even though we anticipate long-term that we may experience a decrease, we have not seen an immediate impact despite the financial woes stateside and in Canada. Globally, we've still continued that sacrifice. And that's the extent to which we love Jamaica and we love our families. We will continue to contribute. But I think at this point in time, it's a pivotal moment to rethink how we leverage remittance, both public and private. If we have 9% that's actually left over to invest in infrastructure, then we need to think about what do those investments look like? How do we leverage that investment capital to create revenue generating institutions and mechanisms in Jamaica? And now we need to think about, now that we can no longer rely on tourism, which was certainly our first earner for our GDP, we now need to begin to think about how can we use our remittance as an agribusiness lever to set up businesses, especially for small businesses around agriculture, and what are the spaces for innovation that exists. But Jamaica has to rethink its relationship with diaspora, because the pivot that is needed to, I would say, thrive beyond COVID-19 is going to require not just the financial resources, but also the intellectual capital of diasporans.
All right, that's brilliant, because I want to go to Neela, because that's where I want to go with this conversation on what are the other resources that both the government and the people need to tap into from the diaspora, right, outside of Western Union. Or wherever else the money goes. What are some of those resources that we should be thinking about and they should be thinking about?
Well, I think as Dr. Dunkley had mentioned, human capital and our intellectual capital is probably our primary and prided resource. I think as well, making sure that we're communicating and we're making each other aware of programming, right? There's a lot of initiatives coming out of JamPro, and I know particularly that the consulate here in Toronto that's servicing the Greater Toronto area has a JamPro representative here that would be happy to collaborate and do a public awareness campaign to understand how we can participate in that. I think there's also a big push here in Canada, especially the announcement of the Black entrepreneurship funding and programming nationwide, that we should start tapping into how we can foster business, right? Now is a great time to be investing in Jamaica and seeking other maybe commercial partnerships, Brand Jamaica, and looking at how we can tap into facilitating business that way. I think that's one area that we can tap into more. And borrowing and investing, real estate investing, the stock markets, these are other opportunities that we can foster relationships and seek growth in.
Is this a part of the role of the council in terms of sharing this kind of perspective for those of us in the diaspora, first of all, and also for those of of Jamaicans who are sitting on the rock where this partnership needs to occur. Karen, what's your take? How is that part of the role of the council?
Absolutely. I think the council certainly, we are to increase and improve Jamaica's engagement with her diaspora, and certainly not just as fiscal sponsors or implementers, but as visionaries, as thinkers, to bring that thinking to the table and to align with resources. So as Naila correctly pointed out, we have a responsibility. It's a moral imperative to share with Jamaicans investment opportunities and to get this information out and to connect them to JAMPRO rep. We have an excellent JAMPRO rep here who's Shane Angus, who operates in the Northeast Corridor and possibly across the United States. But Shane has done a brilliant job of each time we have an entrepreneur. I just had a gentleman, his name is Mr. McLean in Philadelphia. He's now making patties and he wanted to export. And so I connected him with Shane, and JAMPRO very responsive in Jamaica. So it absolutely is our responsibility to inform Jamaicans, because here is the companion rationale behind that. We as Jamaicans need to be the first ones that are invited to the table around investments. Jamaica is the only island in the Caribbean where non-Jamaicans can purchase land and own it forever. Every other island has a caveat where they have to return those lands after 100 years. And I think that we cannot become second-class citizens in our own country. We cannot be an afterthought. And we have to be the ones to really push Jamaica through to this post-COVID pivot.
Well, that's an interesting one, because I want to go down that line of what are some of the issues that are burning in the diaspora that needs to get attention in Jamaica. And I soon come to the voting thing, so let's not go there.
I don't know if you're smiling, you know, it's not bad, but you're putting Naila and I in trouble and smiling nicely while you're saying it too.
Yeah, man, because the issues have to come up, right? And part of the role of the council is to bring these issues to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade and the government. So what are some of these issues, right? You know, we hear returning resident issues, and, you know, maybe we start with you.
Listen, you're not putting us in the hot seat, because this is going to be replaying. So we're going to keep it straight, okay? From our jurisdiction, and I can't speak for Dr. Dunkley, but I know that a hot topic really has a lot to do with travel advisories. And as much as the borders have been opened, and they still are, and we've gone into phase 3 here in Ontario, but it looks like we're pulling back a bit. What we're finding is that people really need to visit the website, www.visitjamaica.com, to get abreast on travel authorization, certificates, timelines, ensuring that they have these certificates before they leave, so that we're in a space where we're educated and informed. Because as you know, numbers are spiking for COVID. We're maybe in about 5,000 case zone in Jamaica, 75 deaths. And the numbers can progressively increase if we're not sure. So I just want to put a plug here to actually encourage people to make sure that they're inquiring into the appropriate travel requirements. And on the Canadian side, be sure to check the canada.gc.ca website for travel advisories and requirements. And when you are planning your trip, remember that if you're not going for business, which is an exception, you've got 2 weeks that you've got to isolate on the ground before you can go out and do your traditional activities. And then even when you return here, 2 weeks. So you're at least looking at a 6-week trip. And that is something that's heavy on the agenda. I know the Consulate General's office here has been partnered with the Jamaican Tourism Board to try and make sure that we're doing public awareness on this issue. Many of us are eager to get back home and get that sunshine in and reunite with our families. But I think
sunshine, food, what you talk about?
That too.
Wait, yeah, the foreign thing for me, no NGD. No, when we go down there, food we go for. The true card. First and foremost, but no, other issues, social issues.
Right. Yeah. So I want to extend. I just want to make sure Naila is finished, and then I'll extend on what Naila has shared.
Yep.
Yeah, go ahead, Karen.
Oh, so thank you for that. So I think there's certainly both a short term and a long term. I think there, of course, as Naila expressed, that immediate connection and communication that needs to happen with diaspora. I think in terms of the social issues, in terms of highlighting, we know that based on the research and data that health and education have always remained at the forefront of issues and areas of development for diaspora. especially magnified and amplified by the COVID-19 pandemic. I think now that we're recognizing it is no longer opportune for people to say, well, the rich people can't just fly out to Miami for treatment. We're understanding what it means when supply chains are disrupted and when travel is curtailed. And therefore, we need to build a Jamaica that is self-sufficient. So health remains at the forefront, where you don't have to know the big man to go to a hospital. Just now, I was dealing with a situation that came to us through Jamaica, a lady diagnosed with COVID. She was in a room, she was throwing up, she was regurgitating. She could not even get hot water. No one had come back to her for 6 hours. And so she texted her friend who lived there, who reached out to me. And then so the cycle began of trying to get her some attention. And the reality is that we do not have the resources that we need to within our healthcare system. So it's not as if they have it and they're intentionally not delivering it. It's that we have to improve the system. We have to improve the access to the Jamaican person who you don't have to know a big man. Access to healthcare is a basic right. So that remains a concern for diaspora. Education is another concern, certainly literacy levels, and not just reading and writing arithmetic, but our children's ability to be producers of content and not just consumers, and also to be problem solvers and critical thinkers. Where remote learning is concerned, we see we have an access issue. I've heard from several alumni members and several individuals saying, how can I get tablets to my school? They get the tablets to the school, now they have to pay for data. Now that they have paid for data, there's still no connectivity because the major providers in Jamaica have not developed the infrastructure. So calls are dropping or people cannot get online. Those are problems that we need to solve together. And it's a partnership approach. Naila and I and our counterparts and all diasporans, we're not standing criticizing Jamaica. We're standing in concert, we're standing in partnership to say that we are experiencing some similar issues and challenges, and we also have some similar opportunities. So let us bring to the table what we know. There are people in our healthcare diaspora that we have here in terms of the expertise that have set up field hospitals. So now that Jamaica is setting up a field hospital, leverage diaspora, leverage those of us who have had to open an entire school system. Like I worked with one of the largest school systems in the United States, over 1 million children, just thinking about back to school and school opening. Let us leverage that. It's at no cost. And then there are food security issues. Naila, I don't know if you had a chance to look at the report that said because of COVID-19, what we have, Donovan, Mr. Simon, is 44% of Jamaican children are now experiencing food insecurity and are hungry. So the short-term solution is the diaspora Northeast, we're sending 100 barrels, but that's a short term. They're going to be hungry again in 20 days. So what now we're looking at is setting up permanent food banks. I think corruption continues to be an issue. I think that we need to have a country that is where corruption is, if we're not free from corruption, it really operates at a level where we cannot notice it and where those who are corruptors are held accountable. And crime and security continues to be an issue. We were just on a Zoom with some returning residents who invited us, and we understand that again, returning residents are targeted. These people have worked hard, they're not rich, they're not wealthy. So those are some of the issues. And Naila, I'm not sure what's happening in Canada. I know in the Northeast, and certainly what I've heard across the United States, Donovan, is the issue of representation. What does diaspora representation look like at home? So our counterpart, Naila, and I saw where Dr. Brown did do an article in the Gleaner. And I think most of us, and we had conversations about this and we concur, we did get a minister of state. So we want to certainly, and let me just say this, I think it's opportune to say to our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Senator the Honorable Kamina Johnson-Smith, she really has done a brilliant job with a tremendous portfolio, and just say to her that we stand in awe of her, and we're especially now grateful that we have a Minister of State that can really target intentionally on diaspora affairs. But we're really talking about radical change. So we're looking for representation on public boards, and the Northeast, we did send a letter, and we're hoping that the letter is accepted in good faith and responded to in good faith for some strategic public boards that as diasporans we should be able to serve, especially in light of COVID. And I will be quiet after this. There is conversation about And my husband will say, boy, that I will have to live to see. But anyway, what does an independent senator who represent diaspora affairs, what does that look like? What could that look like? How could we reimagine the system that we as diaspora, we have our own senatorial representation? Because as you know, those in the United States, we can't sit in terms of being a represented member of parliament. But those are the kinds of issues. The diaspora vote is hanging out there. We as diaspora, we're not unified around it. We wouldn't tackle that right now. Let's go after the low-hanging fruit, sitting on the public boards, an independent Senate. Let us really have the conversation on each ministry having a diaspora desk or a diaspora attaché that feeds into each ministry, and what happens at local government. So that's the kind of radical issues. And you could ask a question that we think and work a lot on. So I'll be quiet here, sir.
Yeah, but you don't know it, Karen, because part of the thing is that, and I was talking to another panel during the elections when we're analyzing the debates, and there's no question about the commitment of Jamaica's diaspora to Jamaica. You talk about it in terms of the fact that, there isn't even a blip in remittances, right? But there's always this commitment to contribute. How do we get more coordinated groups doing stuff without necessarily having it feed into government? Because people are always doing stuff, whether it's through their alumni associations, and I have to give up, Calabar, I'm a Calabar old boy. I have to do the Calabar big up thing. How do we get more groups self-directing in their contribution to the development of Jamaica? What does that look like in your mind? And how, maybe Neela, you can jump into that. Because it is not always going to be government-led, because there's only so much government can do and no more.
Yeah, I think there's capacity issues when you're asking something of that size. I think what we'd have to do is really reflect on what we've been doing so far and what's not working for us. I think there's been a lot of duplication of efforts historically and a lot of silo and fragmentation within our communities. You know, I can appreciate school pride, but it's like if every school association is doing the exact same thing and it's competing for a weekend, for a dinner and a dance, when really if we were pooling our resources and synergizing on capacities and having conversations so that we're allocating need on a more supply demand maybe basis or analysis, I feel that we'd actually get a lot further ahead if we work together. So my idea of something like that would be, we've got a lot of great leaders, but I think we need to stop looking at each other as competition, but and rather look at each other as like, how can we work together as collaborators to level up? Because we're all working towards the same greater good, right? Which is developing these critical partnerships so that even when you go back home, when you go to Calabar, you can see the impact that your contributions afar have made, right? You want to be able to have that visibility, accountability, transparency, right? All of those organizational goals that that really just make you feel better at night in how you participate and maybe even encourage you to participate more, right? So I think it's synergizing and collapsing some of the structures and removing a lot of the red tape. So I know that there may be exemptions that we receive for sending things back home when we're trying to push some of these socially good initiatives. But I think we need to make sure that we're aware of them and we're utilizing them to our best capacity so that we can maximize the benefits.
So here's a line I'm going to go down because I'm also looking at the clock. I think there's a I'm going to call it a cultural dysfunction in terms of how we look at the people in foreign, right? And is there the need to change that kind of thinking? And what do we do, in trying to change how we view foreign and how foreign should contribute? And Karen, I'm going to start with you because you talk about something like land ownership, right? And the fact that Jamaica allows pretty much anybody who have the dollars to come in and own whatever they want to own. There's been talk about, investment from the Spanish and the Chinese and others, right? But there's also, like I said, this perception that the Jamaicans in foreign want none, so somebody else can take it.
Wow, what an interesting perception, and perception is reality. I just wanted to say how we can contribute, and I think in terms of realigning or recalibrating, because I think that this is a critical juncture. And Naila, I'm not sure where you stand on this, but Donovan, if I understand your question, you're asking, how do we change this narrative that we are indeed only just remittances? And I think it begins with us. I think we in diaspora, actually, we are responsible for the narrative because of the barrel syndrome, because of the money syndrome, because when we go, we do a whole big splash, you know, so we come from foreign, even when the credit card charge up our
out.
And I think it begins with us. And I think that this conversation is one of those steps that it takes to say, how do we now shift and how do we now pivot, and what are the other resources that we can bring in terms of intellectual capital, thought partnering. And you speak to, and Naila spoke to, working together in unity and working with agencies and not necessarily government, because you don't always have to work with government. And I look at the health missions, if we were to quantify the contribution of the health missions to Jamaica, it would be in the millions of whether it's Canadian or US dollars. So I think the changing of the narrative begins with us. We in diaspora have to shift to Jamaica that we are beyond just money. We have to say these are the resources we bring, these are the intellectual capitals, and now we are in partnership, sharing our best thinking and our best innovation and our best technology, not technology in terms of hardware, software, but our best thinking and innovation technology to move the country forward. We have to shift that for ourselves.
So it starts with us. Go ahead, Nila.
Sorry, and I think it's also reminding that there's reciprocity. So this is not to avoid the ATM syndrome. It can't be a one-way street, right? You have to bank coin in order for us to give you coin. So I think capitalizing on whatever we can share and exchange is a huge part of that conversation as well, because they have something to share with us as well. This is a part of our cultural richness and our heritage, right? So I think we need to be tapping into that and not cheapen the importance of the skill set and the capacities that we have and how we can hone in on them for the greater good of our development.
All right, listen, we could keep this going for a long time, but we have to kind of look at the clock and say stop. So here's where I want to wrap up. So the Global Jamaica Diaspora Council, not much has changed in government apart from them have, a larger majority. Same minister, now we get back a minister of state, because there's a time when I think Colonel Charles Jr. was minister of state, responsible for diaspora affairs. So another reassignment. What do you guys look towards as the next big steps for the Global Jamaica Diaspora Council, and how does that come out to the regular ones of us out here?
I think in terms of the next big step, that as a council, especially in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, that we need to regroup to say, what does it look like globally in terms of how our communities were impacted across the globe, because it's certainly different based on each geographic region, and then realign the vision of the council with that impact and where we go next in terms of supporting Jamaica's national development, as well as in engaging diasporans at home. And I think that that's the next big step for us. And once we do a realignment and a reimagining in light of COVID-19, so we pivot beyond it, then I think we should come back, Donovan, and have a part 2 where we can clearly articulate together. Naila and I are 2 representatives and we are a unified body, so we want to act in concert with all of our other members to have a conversation, and then we can really give you a clear and united answer in terms of the next steps and what it will look like.
All right, this is the provocation question, but it's only a yes no. Should should Jamaicans in the diaspora get the right to vote? You know what I'm gonna ask it.
And I'm gonna do what I've learned in education. The hanging answer, I don't know where Naila is, but I would certainly say not yet. I would say not yet. I think that we have several pieces, several components just in terms of our political machinery. 37% of the electorate voted in this election. That is it's an abysmal low voter turnout. And I think we need to first of all, fix at home. We need to ensure that we have a system that we can stand behind, where there's been so much that individuals have had to say about the electoral process. So we need a system before we can expand or even anticipate how do we now pull others in outside of that system. Someone said to me, Karen, not even the United States of America allow people who are outside in other countries to vote on the day of election. They say it just doesn't happen. Certainly have absentee ballots. And that is something, maybe that's the first step. But I think I would just do the very short answer.
Yes, hold on. NGD, what is it?
So I'm going to take the legal thing. It depends.
Top 40 under 40. You will know though, it depends, right?
I'm just going to give you a few things to consider, right?
All right.
From a constitutional perspective, there are legislative requirements that you have physical residency. And so that's a challenge that we'd have to overcome. There'd have to be money in the bank for referendums and a constitutional amendment. So that's a hurdle that we'd have to face, right? And this is not legal advice. This is just me speaking. I have to put that disclaimer out there too. But then on the flip side, I do think that the diaspora's voice would be validated by having the right to vote and participate. It's just something that we are going to have to figure out how we balance that when you look at the numbers of the diaspora and the weight that's there, and then the individuals who are physically residing and the impact that those votes can have on the decisions that are being made. So
yes and no.
Yeah. And Donovan and one of the questions is, when we do get there, if we get there, is it Jamaican born? Because remember, if you quantify our children who are born here, that's a lot. But Donovan and this question raises a larger question of constitutional reform. I think we need to think about term limits in Jamaica. I think we really should at some level of representation, whether it's at the prime minister level or the parliamentary level, we should have some kind of term limits. I think Jamaica should seriously consider removing the Queen as head of state and develop and implement a republic model that works for Jamaica, that fits our context, where we can elect our leader or prime minister, regardless of who has the majority lead in the parliament. I think that this would really shift some of the outcomes that we have seen throughout our legacy of independence.
Big issues, big issues. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to end the show. I mean, it's not one of those things. We have to do a part two. Dr. Karen Dunkley, Neela Gordon, this is your ladies. Thanks for joining and having a very informative discussion, right? And maybe come back as we're not finished, right?
Thank you so much for having me. It's always great to see Naila and to stand in, I would say, in community and in service with her on the Global Jamaica Diaspora Council. And so thank you so much, Donovan, and thank you, Naila.
Yeah, man.
Thank you, Dr. Dunkley, and thank you, Donovan, as well, for the opportunity. It's a pleasure, and thanks to everyone who's listened.
All right, guys, take it easy.
Bye. Enjoy your evening.
Bye-bye.
All right, I tell you.
All good.
All good, not true? Yeah, man.
Yeah, man.
We would love to continue it, and we'll try again. Next week, this conversation continues on Wataguan, because we're going to talk about migration. Is it truly greener on the other side? And we're going to have a couple of guests who are going to share their experience having migrated from Jamaica, right? And to share how it has worked for some, how it has not worked for others, right? Because sometimes this perception that it is greener on this other side is not necessarily true. The week after, we're going to talk about sweet Jamaica. Is it better on the rock? And we're going to talk to Jamaicans who had the opportunity to move overseas, but they didn't. They stayed in Jamaica and they've made it work for them. And then on October 16th, Wataguan is going to focus on financial education. We're going to talk to Dolores McKenzie about some key things about financial education that we need to do within our community in order to help us be better. Enough things for Wataguan. Right? Of course, I always ask you to follow us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, share the program, right? Because we want to grow it and want other people to benefit from it. And lots of comments today. I saw people asking questions, and hopefully you get some answers, right? We'll check them later and I'll respond to a few. But help us to share the program with others who might benefit from it. All right? So until next time, next week, 7 o'clock, when we do it again, take care, walk good, stay safe. COVID is still around, because some people think it's gone, but it's not gone, right? And, you know, we have to play the Buju Banton as we exit. All right? Take care. Until next week.
I want to I respect and love, man, to all Jamaica, no matter where in the world. One eye, like I own you. No matter where in this world I go, I am a Jamaican. Global papers I have to show, cause I am a Jamaican. No matter where in this world I go, I am a Jamaican. Global papers I have to